The LCC has tremendous value when it comes to bringing together diverse partners to address the very complex natural resource and environmental issues that we're dealing with in our region these days. We talk about the power of partnerships. Many of the issues that we have to address are much more complicated than just one agency, one university, one conservation group can address single-handedly. So the idea is that the LCC can be that group that brings them all together and helps leverage those resources and actually bring a lot of value to the different, all the different investments that these different organizations are putting into conservation efforts across the region. Helping partners identify what resources are out there, where we can leverage those resources that have been being poured into different conservation efforts, and identify areas where we haven't addressed efforts yet and haven't addressed different conservation priorities. You know, if there's gaps in where we're in some of our efforts, I think the LCC can really bring to bear some of those opportunities that are out there and help put the resources into those that aren't necessarily being taken care of right now. Well, the LCC and the CESU partnership, the Cooperative Ecosystem Studies units, the real value between that partnership is that, having access to 30 universities across the entire Gulf Coast region, we can bring expertise to the broader LCC partnership that the federal agencies, the state agencies, and some of the other non-governmental organizations like the Nature Conservancy may not already have. A lot of the issues that we're dealing with are very complex. They cut across disciplines. They require a regional approach. They require a multidisciplinary approach. And then universities can help fill that niche. And so the Cooperative Ecosystem Studies unit helps bridge that gap between the LCC and that expertise that resides within our university systems. The Gulf Coast Prairie LCC is very unique compared to several, when we look at some of the other LCCs across the nation. We're unique geographically, ecologically. We go from Louisiana to deep South Texas, 60 inches of rain in Beaumont to 18 inches of rain on the far western end of the valley of deep South Texas all the way up into Kansas. So from an ecological standpoint, huge numbers of issues. When we look at the pressures facing our LCC is home to 3 of the 10 largest metropolitan areas in the U.S. Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio. Texas alone is projected to double in population in the next 20 to 30 years. So if we look at the heart of growth where it's going to occur along the interstate corridors. So that's right in the middle of our LCC. So we look at land use conversion, the loss of rural working lands, those farms, ranches, and forests that provide, not only do they provide the commodities that we're all used to, whether it's food, fiber, and wildlife resources, but there's tremendous ecological services that they provide, clean air, clean water. The loss of those services that those rural working lands provide is probably one of the biggest challenges we're going to face over the next 10, 20, 30 years. To complicate that even more is Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana are a private land state. 95% of the land within Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana is privately held. So we have very little public land, to work with. So the additional challenge is how do we create those incentives where we can promote good stewardship of our resources on those private lands. Obviously, climate change is going to be a big driver as we start dealing with more extreme weather patterns. A good example right now is the drought that we're in. Tremendous impacts to our environment and to our natural resources across the LCC. That's something we're likely going to be dealing with for well past the foreseeable future. Also, a significant threat is just the general loss in land use conversion associated with development of these rural landscapes. Another thing is the loss of the habitat, fragmentation of the habitat. Where Texas is blessed on one hand by having tremendous energy resources, both oil, gas, wind, But along with the development of those resources, we have significant impacts from with the infrastructure to support the development of those resources. Our challenge is, how do we promote conservation? How do we actually implement it on the ground and have a lasting impact? One I can think of specifically is the identification and development of a grassland shrubland conservation framework. So we want to look at, not only we know how to conserve grasslands, we know how to restore grasslands, but the challenge is, where do we do it? Where do we get our biggest bang for a buck? Where do we get the greatest environmental and ecological uplift? And so the Gulf Coast Prairie LCC has partnered with some universities to address that very issue, and then tie back not only the conservation of those grassland and shrubland habitats, but also those species that are dependent upon that. And the challenge is, how do we promote the conservation of those habitats, therefore benefiting those species that are high priority species, from both a societal value. Some are federally listed species, so we have an obligation to focus our conservation efforts on them. And so the LCC, one of the big things that they're trying to do is translate that research into application on the ground. And so, developing this partnership of the federal agencies who can bring resources to bear, the state agencies who have local and regional expertise, the conservation organizations who may have regional priorities, and then coupling that with the universities who can deliver the research and then translate that research to the application on the ground. The LCC is that common denominator amongst all those. They're the one aggregating that expertise and getting it to where we can actually apply it toward our conservation priorities within the region.